Year 6, this is your Thursday, the 4th of March English lesson. Still reading the Unforgotten Coat. I'm going to start reading today from page 41. You've got this picture here with £1 written on it. And this is where I got to yesterday, so page 41. I remember this one day too. One day, Mrs. Spenlove made this announcement that we were going to do an experiment the next day. We were all supposed to bring in a little canister, like an old-fashioned plastic film canister. You are bound to have one hanging around your house, she said. We're going to make our own rockets. But when the next day came, no one had brought one in. She seemed very disappointed. I wanted you all to do this yourself, she said. I've only got 3, so I'm afraid you're all going to have to watch instead. Anyway, she did this experiment where she stuck an Alka-Seltzer in the inside of the lid of one of the canisters with blue tack. Then she poured some water into the canister. She put the lid on, she turned it upside down. No one was that interested until about 2 minutes later when the canister shot up to the ceiling and hit a light bulb, spraying water everywhere. Suddenly everyone wanted to go, but Mrs. Spenlove made this big speech about you only get out what you put in, and since how none of us were going to bother to find a film canister, we would all just have to copy out some diagrams of the expansion of gases and propulsion and stuff instead of having fun. As soon as the little playtime began, Chinggis went to the quiet corner benches, and he announced that he had film canisters, blue tack and Alka-Seltzer, all available for £1 a time. He opened his bag. He must have had 30 plastic film canisters, a massive slab of blue tack and a catering pack of Alka-Seltzer. You can buy one from me to make your own small rocket, he said. 1 film canister, 1 stick of blue tack and an Alka-Seltzer is £1. Everyone wanted one. People were pushing around, handing over the money. I said, you've bought this in, but you didn't tell Mrs. Spenlove. Why? I suddenly felt really sorry for her. He said, why would I use them in the lesson? Last night, I collected all of these from neighbours to sell. But you could have sold them to us before the lesson. Then everyone would have had one and she would have been really happy. Before she showed you how it works, no one wanted one. No one would have paid £1 when they don't know what it does. Now that Mrs. Spenlove explains, everyone wants one. Her lesson was good advertising. But you bought blue tack and Alka-Seltzer as well as the canisters. How did you know? Rockets were invented in Mongolia. Propulsion is in our blood. A lad called Baki, he's in the police now, said, they're my canisters. You can't make me pay for my own canisters. Apparently the night before, Chinggis had gone and knocked on every door in his block of flats, including Baki's, and he'd asked them all if they had any film canisters. I give you the canister free, said Chinggis. Blue tack is free also. Just £1 for the Alka-Seltzer. Poor old Baki went for that, honestly. They didn't know that they'd been cut in half until they tried to walk away. Chinggis got a little Nergu to help him count all the cash. 34 quid they'd made. And all day the school was full of popping sounds and quietly fizzing puddles. There's only so much good guiding that you can do in a primary school playground. Even though I really tried to spin it out, I'd pretty much pointed out every stone and weed by the end of 10 playtimes. Mrs. Harrison was the dinner lady. She had the power to give you a plaster if you cut yourself. The big red box held outdoor playtime equipment. You could take what you wanted, but you had to put it back when you were finished. Mrs. Harrison was always watching. The numbers and squares painted on the floor were for playing hopscotch, but no one ever did, because no one really knew how. The quiet corner, a little ring of apple trees with the bench in the middle, had been made in memory of a boy who died just before we came to the school. Everyone said he was buried under the trees and that there were bits of him in the apples, but it wasn't true. He was buried in the graveyard like everyone else. Until Chinggis came, I had spent most playtimes with Mimi, walking up and down beside the railings, talking about the inevitable future success of our imaginary girl group, the Surfing Eskimos. Until I took on the good guide duties, I'd had no idea that there was a small tribe of sad-looking Year 5 lads who more or less lived in the clump of trees that had been planted to hide the bins. They spent their time playing on their DS's and avoiding Shocky and Duncan. I had no idea that Mrs. Harrison spoke French because she came from the Congo. I hadn't known that you could find frogs in the big clump of nettles between the playground and the car park, and I hadn't known that there were hula hoops in the outdoor play box. Chinggis took one out and asked me what it was. I put it over my head and tried to spin it round on my waist, but it just clattered straight to the floor. Oh, he said, it's a hula hoop. You do it like this. He took it off me, dropped it over his head and, barely moving his hips, made it spin like a blender. He could carry on walking and talking at the same time too, Nogu said. Sorry, Nogu too. Mrs. Harrison laughed and said, you don't often see boys doing that. Chingus stood still. The hoop dropped to the floor. He looked around the playground. This place is nearly nothing but girls. Where are all the boys? This is the red playground, I said. It's for anyone. If you want to play football, you have to go to the blue playground. It's through there. Nearly all the boys play football. Chingus led Nogu through the little gap between the dining hall and the porter cabin, and I followed. The two of them stood there for the rest of break, watching the boys charging up and down the blue playground, yelling and pointing and chasing the ball. Chingus said, does this have rules? I think so, I said. You need to find them out. We need to play this. Right. So the two of them came back to ours and made me explain the rules of football. I had to borrow a ball from next door, and in the end, I had to borrow the little boy too. Jordan, he was called. He couldn't understand why they didn't know how to play. I said, they're from Mongolia. Even so, they must have footy. They have footy everywhere. Not in Mongolia. No, said Chingus, Mongolia is horses, horses, horses. If we want to play with a ball, we get on a horse first. If we want to throw something or shoot something, we get on a horse. If we want to hunt, we get on a horse. If we get married, we take the bride on a horse. The only exception is wrestling. Wrestling is on the ground. Jordan had heard of countries that had floods and disease and war, but he'd never heard of anywhere so bad it didn't have football. He was nearly in tears. He taught them the skills, the rules, the tricks, and after that they sat on the pavement and he taught them the entire history of Liverpool FC. Chingus said, in football, it is just as much talking as it is playing. From then on, Chingus spent little playtime trying to get me to talk to him about the offside rule, the transfer window and the history of the Champions League. He didn't play though. He made Nogu play and he took me to watch him. He'd point to him running up and down, barging into people and say, on the ball, yes, he's a bit of a donkey, but off the ball, he's a real workhorse. Even when he was talking about football, he was still quite horsey in his thinking. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So year 6. I've finished reading to page 47 of the Unforgotten Coat. There's actually not that much more left to read. I'd love you to try and finish the book. Read as much as you can, and then I'd like you to carry on doing the diary entry. So choose another part of the story to write a diary entry about. And like I said before, use Diary of a Wimpy Kid, use Tom Gates, use that style of diary writing as your inspiration. Okay, to put little diagrams, little speech bubbles, do it in a very informal style. And choose another part of the story to write about. All in the style of the diary entry. I look forward to seeing your work in Zoom. Okay, good luck, year 6.